You're spending money on one of the largest assets of your entire life? So how do you determine which property has the strongest odds of delivering back the best ROI to you? Hey everybody, it's Alyson with Live South Denver, your real estate strategist and realtor for the South Denver area. We spend a lot of time on this channel talking about how to size up a property and evaluate it based on its soundness for its design, its aesthetic, its location, its upkeep, its condition. But what if you're more inclined to look at a property primarily from a financial perspective? If you're looking at it for how much investment do I have to put in? How much cash flow is it going to bring me? What is my ROI? Well, not everyone looks at properties that way. And if you don't own a property or more than one property, you might be ready to tune out. But stay tuned because there is much to see that may impact how you look at properties in the future as well in this video. Today, we are looking primarily at how do I analyze an investment property for someone I'm working with. Now, I don't work with straight investors. I don't work with guys who fix and flip. I don't work with guys who do wholesaling. I work with the everyday investor. I work with someone who bought a property, kept it, moved on, bought another property, now has at least two, maybe a third property in their portfolio, and is wanting to take those properties and leverage them, maybe merge them through a 1031 exchange into a dream property, wanting to take those properties and put them into a property that performs better, they get more cash flow out of. Or sometimes I'm working with a family who has amassed several rental properties that paid for college and now they don't have kids in college anymore. So what are they going to do with those several properties? It could go into a mountain property. It could go into one property. It could go to a beach property. So we're taking things and reframing what we have in our real estate wealth and assets and figuring out what is next. Evaluating property for value and ROI for an everyday investor generally looks a little bit different than it does when I'm working with someone who's buying a single family home as their primary residence. When I'm supporting that client through a 1031 exchange, there are a lot of steps that go into a successful valuation and 1031 exchange completion. On the sell side, or what we call the relinquished property, we have a valuation to conduct. We build out a time frame and a plan that gets everything moving and aligned with the IRS timeframes for the 1031 exchange. We build a backup plan for what happens if my seller does not find a property to exchange into within the IRS timeframes. You've got to identify the property, then you've got to close on that property. Oh my goodness, we do not want capital gains liability on this fantastic property that we're getting rid of, relinquishing. So what is the backup plan? I mentioned that sometimes there are multiple properties that could be coming into play, and not all of those are always in the same state. And sometimes we are not buying in the state that we are selling or buying one single property in the same state. So that means we have to amass a team that is knowledgeable and can function in the same time frame to make everything comply with IRS guidelines. The seller, of course, has to be in touch with their accommodator. This is the person that helps facilitate the 1031 exchange. They hold the funds. This keeps them out of the possession of the seller so that they can stay in their tax deferred status. Super important. And then once the property gets under contract, or properties, it looks very much like a traditional transaction, except that we are monitoring contingencies, stops, starts, very closely because that can affect, again, the timeline and staying in queue with the IRS and what needs to happen. Now, here's where we get serious about this ROI conversation. On the buy side, the replacement properties, we have got valuations to conduct. First, we are figuring out where are we going to be? Multiple places, one place, one property, multiple properties. How are we funneling all of those funds down? We have to follow the IRS rules. Generally, we can take the funds and move them into 3 properties or to 200% of the value which we are moving. We also have to talk about buying up because most investors have been using depreciation, which is so fantastic over the years, but there's depreciation recapture, which the IRS loves to ding on. So we're often buying up a little bit in value to avoid having some tax liability on the depreciation recapture. So we've got to figure out where that money is coming from if you're going to avoid that depreciation recapture. And also, are you buying up enough that you need a loan? Are you bringing more cash? So there's components there to address. Importantly, we want to be using all the funds from the relinquished properties. If not, the IRS is going to get a hold of them and tax them, and that is what we are trying to avoid. Now, once we have gotten down the funnel close enough to choosing properties, we have gone, we have looked, we have seen, we have tasted, we have smelled, we have gotten past the smell of cats or animals or smoke or pot or whatever, unless you're going in to really do some hardcore work. And we have narrowed it down to the ones that are the favorites. How is it that we are valuing these properties to determine if they are worthy of being purchased? Ultimately, how we're going to evaluate the property depends on what it's going to be used for, how it's going to be held as an investment. But here are some of the tools that we are using. The asset performance test. This looks at current investment options compared to the previous investment holdings. Why? Because the investor understands their previous investment holdings. They know if they were making money, if they were losing money, what the cap rate may have been, cash on cash return. They understand what their capital gain taxes would have been on that. We are looking at from multiple facets, and then we are taking that and comparing those multiple facets to the potential options in front of us. Now, if we're changing the type and style of investment, maybe we're finding that it's not helpful, but it is one tool in our toolbox to see if we're making an upgrade in our investment portfolio or possibly a downgrade in our investment portfolio. We are absolutely estimating the capital gain tax risk if this 1031 exchange is not completed. There are multiple reasons for this, but it can be a challenge sometimes to do everything within that IRS timeline. A straight fix and flipper or wholesaler is not having a problem getting things done. They look only at numbers. Sometimes they never even look at a property. But the everyday investor that I work with uses a little more heart and soul in what they are purchasing, because oftentimes there is going to be some personal use down the road with these properties. Not always, but the age and stage that I'm entering in with these families, there is usually personal use as a goal down the road. So there's a lot more engagement, a lot more care, a lot more intentionality about the property, which brings a little more heart and soul and care about what is being purchased. And that makes the process longer. Well, when you have such a short time frame for identification and a limited number of identification opportunities, it can slow things down. So we need to have backup options for the what if scenario. And that can be hard. The mind gets stuck on the goal, the thing, I want it this way. Well, you know what can get us over that hurdle? Understanding how much you're going to owe Uncle Sam if you don't make it happen. So that is another piece of what we're doing, because that is a part of the valuation. What the value is in this is what you're saving in taxes. We do traditional comps, just like we would do with single family homes. Okay, so we are looking at what you would find in like size, style, usability in a similar radius, similar size. 1 to 3 miles is typically what an appraiser would use. So we try not to even go to 3 miles. We try to stay in 1. If we can get smaller, we do. But 1 to 1.5 mile radius, we're looking at similar homes. But then we're going different. If this home has a special feature, that's a plus or a minus. If we've got a property that has mountain views on open space, we're not going to find that many in a 1 mile radius. So we may have to go out farther, and we need to comp those for the special feature. What if we've gone into downtown and we're buying a unit, a townhouse, a condo, and yours doesn't have parking? Well, to not have parking in downtown is a ding on resale value because parking is such a challenge. So we have to comp similarly for units without parking and find out what the valuation is. So we are comping for special features on the plus or the minus side as well. All right, once we have done that, we are looking at ROI over time. Now, ROI is an unknown until you sell the property. You have to walk away with net proceeds to know what that is, but we are aiming at something. We are trying to predetermine what that is going to be, and here is how we're doing it. We are looking at the long arc of how has the home value changed in this small little area over time. So we just did this for some clients. We looked at a neighborhood here and said, okay, 15 years ago, what was the value of this entire neighborhood for all the sales that year? Now let's look at this neighborhood that you're also looking at. What was the value of the sales in this neighborhood? All the sales 15 years ago. Now let's compare it to this last year, the last 12 months for each of those neighborhoods. Was there any difference between the two when we look at the trajectory? Well, actually, they both grew about 38%. They were right on par. Like, that was fantastic. So there was no difference for them. They could pick either neighborhood. But then we did it in intervals, and we went back just a couple years, 4 years. There was a pretty big difference between two of these neighborhoods. One was far outshining the other since COVID. We went back about 9, 10 years. The same neighborhood was outshining the other one. So the reason this is important is, how long are you going to hold your asset? You may know, you may not. But if you know, I only want to hold this about 7 to 10 years, and then we want to divest all these properties again and go put them in a beach house. We want to go put them in a mountain house. We want to be done. We are tired of being landlords or whatever it is. Then that long trajectory may be too long. Maybe you want to look at something shorter. Now, this data is not the end all be all. Maybe there was a reason that we have to dig into why the curve changed in such a short time. Maybe the neighborhood did something different. A new road came in, a new school, and we have to dig deeper. But these kinds of things are valuable for you to understand location, right? Location, which is different than, am I gonna invest in my asset and improve how it's gonna sell? Is there an unchangeable feature like mountain view or no parking that is always gonna stick with my property, right? We are trying to ascertain the trajectory over time of what's happening, which should tell you something about where you're gonna land down the road for resale. Now, curiously, my clients actually chose the property that was performing below the other property we were looking at. Why? Because they are, as I shared, the kind of everyday investor who has personal plans for this property in the near future. And the one that was performing at a lower trend over the last several years just fit them better. It was a townhome nestled in a single family home neighborhood. It had a large lawn out front that was maintained by the HOA. It had a big shade tree. There was a pool that was maintained by the HOA, so great for grandkids to come and play. And it was the shortest commute to their children and grandchildren. So all along the way, it checked every box. And they felt like between the schools that it fed into, the area, and the opportunity for them to make it what they wanted with a little bit more space, that differential to them was not the deciding factor. But what was important was the conversation. They think like an investor. The numbers were important. And I love being a support in that because I am all about helping families build, protect, and transfer generational wealth, and real estate is such a big part of that. So if you are planning on being involved in a 1031 exchange, the sell side, the buy side, you want to get involved in having real estate as part of your portfolio, please reach out. I would love to support, help, lead, guide in any way I possibly can. And I will, of course, see y'all next week.